Well, thank you very much, Shraddha. I remember those staircase conversations. You know that it's 11 o'clock and and then you start talking about something really, really interesting. Usually it had an ethical component to it. Because, of course, yes, I think it's very easy living on one's own, which is what I do now, actually, for the first time for a very long time. And I can go home and I just sort of sit there, think about the day. But when someone else is there, especially if it's a Buddhist, and you have to sort of think, I wasn't too happy about that. And then you can kind of start to do what Pranjamanas was talking about, become a little bit more subtle in the way that you engage with your own life. You realise that actually what's important in this whole business of ethics is how we relate to each other. And the wonderful thing about Buddhism, this is not in my talk, I'll get to my talk in a minute. The wonderful thing about Buddhism is it's very clear from the outset that if we do something that is actually helpful for ourselves, that will have a positive effect. So I want to talk about that quite a lot in the talk. If we do something for someone else, it's definitely going to have a positive effect on us. So what we do right from the outset, before I get to start talking about my talk, is we see that actually what's important is knowing how we connect up, and that we're much, much more connected than we sometimes feel. Sometimes we can feel very separate, and especially at the moment in our world, there's a lot of very big and troubling things happening. And, every time I look at the paper, I sort of think, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But of course, we do need to know what's going on. But one of the things that I think we bring as Buddhists to that whole complex, difficult life that's emerging in our society at the moment is we are more and more conscious, more and more subtle, more and more refined in how we relate to each other. That's much more important, probably, than what views we hold, even what attitudes we hold. How are we relating to each other? That's what's important. Anyway, here we go. I think it's quite funny that I end up talking about ethics, because probably if you'd asked me 60 years ago about ethics, I would have had a very, very un-Buddhist take on the matter. Because I was brought up in the north of Ireland, and what was important in my community was what it looked like. So there were socially acceptable customs and behaviours which you certainly could not really go against unless you were extremely foolhardy and probably very confident and things, which I wasn't. But I was just remembering earlier on when we were meditating that one time I was going with my sister, who's 3 years younger, across the bridge in Coleraine to Sunday school on a Sunday morning. And my hat blew off into the river. So I couldn't go to Sunday school. I had to turn around and go home. I'm with my sister, because there was no way you could have gone to Sunday school without a hat. So, what kind of thing is that? Anyway, there were lots of things like that, like you didn't go out unless you'd done your coat up and you had to wear your gloves. And I'm talking about the 50s and 60s, so it is quite a long time ago. But, my ethical world was conditioned by commandments, either the ones that they told us about in church or the ones that I knew very well were important in my home. There were things that you had to do. And if you didn't do it, woe betide you. There would be a nasty effect. But it wasn't really anything to do with what was kind of moral or ethical in the sense that we're now going to be talking about it. I was just thinking when I was reflecting this talk to begin with that we all have that kind of natural thermometer of ethics. If you see somebody doing something caring for someone else. You know, like on the underground, somebody turns round and helps someone carry a huge suitcase up the stairs, because how on earth would they think they could possibly manage it? And then, you know, the person is so grateful, but everybody else is seeing it. You know that thing? It makes us feel more alive, doesn't it, when people do a kindly act. Just a small thing like that, nothing major. But those, we kind of feel more inspired, we feel more alive when we see that kind of kindly observant action being carried out. And I think that tells me that we have a sort of natural inclination towards kindly, other regarding approaches to life. So just a few words of introduction about Buddhist ethics. Obviously, me telling you a bit about those socially acceptable behaviours like wearing your hat on a Sunday and stuff, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about Buddhist ethics. Buddhist ethical principles are not dictated by predetermined laws or commandments set from outside ourselves. And that was very much my experience as a child. So the trouble with that sort of system is that if you go wrong, you're in trouble. Because there's judgment, isn't there? And you also kind of have to hide. I remember one time coming back from the building site, which was around the back of our house, and I used to love going to the building site. I was probably about 8 with my mates. And, you know, we'd been told we weren't allowed to go to the building site. And I got home late, and my mum said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Oh, just playing out, you know, with people." And she said, "I know you've been to the building site because your shoes are too clean." So I'd spent a lot of time getting all the sand and cement off them so she wouldn't know I'd been to the building site. So, you know, it was all... So it wasn't really to do with telling the truth or being upfront about who you are or what you wanted or what you thought. It was about doing what you were told. So that is not Buddhist ethics. We do have guidance. We do have suggested ways in which we might behave. We have very clear aspirations in Buddhist ethics, but it's not to do with laws and commandments. It's to do with what really helps us to be in better connection with each other, with ourselves, and with the sort of greater good, you could say. So there's no place for guilt or sin or blame. Although because of our conditioning, of course, we do experience those things often. And even if we weren't brought up in a Christian framework as I was, our society has that kind of at its root, doesn't it? So there is a kind of rule of law. And also I'm not saying that we should go against the rule of law either, but it's to do with where your internal gauge of how you want or need to behave is set. So now here's a really, really important little bit of definition. Buddhism describes actions that are motivated by positive states of mind as skillful. So if you say that's a skillful action, it's activated, it's motivated by generosity, kindness, clarity and understanding. Very positive mental states. Generosity, kindness, clarity, understanding. And these are the kind of opposites of a very, very well-known list, which is the unskillful actions, the reverse of this. They would arise from negative states of mind: greed, hatred and delusion. Come across those. Sometimes in Buddhism they're called the 3 poisons. Greed, you could call it craving or clinging or grasping. Hatred, you could call it irritation, aversion, pushing away. Delusion, you could say, is ignorance, doubt, vagueness, all those sorts of things. So please remember these 3 really key words: greed, hatred and delusion, the 3 poisons. and actions that are fueled by the three poisons are unskillful in Buddhism. Unskillful because they lead to unhappiness. So if you read what it said on the wall, just thought I'd better write it down because my memory goes a bit furry sometimes in these contexts. Experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows, like a shadow that never departs. And the opposite is also true. If you speak or act with an impure mind, then suffering follows. So a pure mind would be a mind that's completely clear of greed, hatred and delusion. And an impure mind in Buddhism would be a mind that's absolutely full up of greed, hatred and delusion. So you might just ask yourself, this is an interesting little experiment. Well, you're just sitting here now and it looks like you're being ever so attentive. Everybody's sort of looking at me and some people are writing notes, some people are grinning a bit, some people are smiling, some people, nobody's asleep. How are you feeling any greed right now? Is there something you want particularly right now? Probably there isn't terribly. You're probably just more or less happy being here. That's the beginning of the talk after all. You've got another long time to sit there. I've been feeling a little bit more greed-like later on, or maybe a bit of hatred. Is there any hatred present? Is there any aversion present right now? Maybe you're not very comfortable or something like that. Is there? Or is it just more or less okay? And it's a very, very interesting thing to ask yourself, because if there isn't any greed or hatred present, then you're probably quite able to relax, and you're probably quite able to open your ears. You're probably able to be quite receptive. You're probably able to let something of what I'm saying get in. Because what I'm saying is not me, Vandanajyoti, it's actually what the Buddha says. You know, this is really core Dharma stuff, and it's really lovely that you're listening, because I can't imagine anything better than knowing these things. So, just to recap, the reason why I'm saying this is important is if there is no greed or hatred or not too much delusion present, then you're probably in a quite receptive frame of mind. If, on the other hand, you find there's some greed or hatred present, then the rest of my talk is about what you can do about it. Please stay here. So I want to start off with something that was actually what Amananandi was saying in the tea break, but also what Surya Gupta was saying yesterday, also what Pranyamanas was saying in his introduction to the meditation in the first half. Actually, what we're talking about here is how do we make conditions where we can be more receptive, we can be more alert, we can be more interested and engaged in life. How do we do it? And that's really what we need to know. Of course, one of the ways we do it is we follow the Buddha's teaching about ethics, which we'll get onto in a bit. But before that, I just wanted to set up a little story. I was just remembering a lovely friend of mine who some of you will remember. Her name is Subhadramati. And recently I had the good fortune to be on a fantastic retreat. And it was up a mountain in Spain, and lots of people got ordained. They got these cases on, and they were so happy. So as part of the retreat, the people who are ordaining the people turn up, and I was one of them. So they'd been there for weeks already, and then I turned up with about 13 other people to ordain them, to make them part of the Triratna Buddhist order. So at the very, very first moment of meeting them, when we walked around the corner into the retreat centre, the first person I met was Subhadramati. She was absolutely glowing. She was so happy to see us, and there was absolutely no side to it. It was completely up front, happy, and she was just completely delighted with what had been happening on the retreat. So there was something really extraordinary about this. She was entirely positive, and the atmosphere that she created with this positivity had helped her team to also be very, very positive. So that had an amazing knock-on effect on the people who had been on retreat for several weeks by this time. And I talked to some of them about it, and they said, we really loved her. We loved her. She was just so helpful and never judgmental. So back to, if your hat blows off, you can't go to Sunday school. No judgment. If something had gone a little bit awry, she would be troubled by it and would get into communication with the person and give them the opportunity to talk about it and talk it through. But what was so extraordinary was she had made the sorts of conditions that those people absolutely needed to look at what they needed to look at in their ordination retreat. I mean, it's actually a very challenging retreat. People are ready and wanting to look deeply at their own experience and see who and what they are, and to find out where they can change. And even though they're kind of, they've done a lot of work on themselves to be at that retreat in the first place, they're ready to be ordained, they've still got plenty of work to do, as have I, and everybody here. So it's not that we suddenly get to a stage where we've got it all sussed out. No, we continue to work, and we follow the Buddhist teachings in order to help us to work. What was so lovely, though, just to finish off about Subhadramati and that retreat, she helped people to feel valued. She helped them to feel loved. She felt them to feel confident and able to do the work they had to do. Just reminded me of that little poem, that Raymond Carver poem. Did you get what you want in this life? And he says, well, what did you want? And he says, to call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. Would that be nice? Yeah. Well, that's what we're after here. And of course, what I'm really talking about is the core of the Buddha's teaching, which is how do we work to create conditions, the conditions that allow us to grow, that encourage other people to grow. This was the crucial insight that the Buddha perceived at the point of enlightenment. He saw that all phenomena, all things that arise in this world, do so because of conditions that gave rise to them. And when those conditions change, those things change too. So, in other words, we're in this kind of soup of change. Every kind of way we act, every way we respond to someone, every time we pass them a plate with metta, every time we engage with a look that's interested rather than... we are, in a sense, feeding this great web of conditions that enable ourselves and others to grow. So Subhadramati and her team were creating positive conditions. People could do the work they needed to do on that retreat. They were met with kindness, they were met with interest, they were met with love, actually. Not critical, not judgmental. They could unfurl, they could open out without fear. They could allow themselves to change in creative and skillful directions. So can you think of times in your life, or a time, maybe just now? Haven't time to hear from you about this, but can you think of a time when you were in a situation like that, where you felt that ease and confidence? You thought, I can just be myself here. I can just be myself with that person. And how that is for you when that happens. You see, we ourselves become the conditions of change for others. We form part of this huge web of conditions. And how we are makes other people have the possibility of doing what they need to do for themselves. You see? So it's not just looking after me, it's looking after us. So less and less of me, and more of us. That's how this web of conditions works. So I'm to talk about this now in a slightly sort of technical way. Our level of consciousness, how conscious we are, how subtly aware we are, allows us to make choices and to control those conditions to some extent. So if we're completely sort of, and we're just charging through life and we do we probably wouldn't be spending Tuesday night in a Buddhist centre, actually, to tell you the honest truth. You've probably come a very long way already because you're here. But we can see amongst ourselves, amongst us humans, that there are some people that are not that developed. I was just looking at these lovely lotuses on the wall. And you probably just think, oh yes, a bit of embroidery on the wall. But actually, what those are is a reference to one of the things that happened in the Buddha's life immediately after he got enlightened. He had a vision of human beings like a bed of lotuses. Some of them were completely open, their faces bright red and facing into the sun. Some of them were just buds beginning to open. Some of them were still closed up buds, and some of them hadn't even got up to the surface of the water. So we, human beings, have very, very great skills in setting up conditions and organising things. We are sort of hardwired to look after ourselves in a material sense. And we've become a very dominant species because of this. We can, fix it if it goes wrong. But we tend to do that on the basis of me, mine, myself. What do I need? What do I want? And that would include, my partner, my children, my mother. I'm looking after my mother quite a lot at the moment. It's like I'm looking after myself when I look after my mother. It's not like I'm being tremendously altruistic or generous. She's like part of me, really. I've known her for 72 years, for goodness sake. So it's natural for me to make sure my mum's okay. It's not so natural for me to check on the old lady living next door who doesn't actually seem to want to talk to me, but occasionally we have a little chat. That would be a big stretch out. So what I'm trying to say is we have a kind of inbuilt ability to look after ourselves. And it can become very introvert, can be just looking after ourselves, not paying attention to what's on the outside. And it's an instinctual thing. We call it the Mano-Niyama process of conditionality, but never mind about that. I'm going to refer to it as the Mano-Niyama process, just because it's an easy shorthand. But human consciousness has evolved way beyond this instinctual Mano-Niyama process level. We have consciousnesses that can reflect. We can see the level of impact of what we do. And we can make decisions informed by our ability to reflect on the greater good of one action over another, beyond our personal benefit and preference. So I don't have to just do the things that I think are going to serve me. What I can do is to open out and see, that's going to be good for all of us here. That'll be good. So it'd be good for us to know about this. So I'm trying to tell you about it. This level of conditionality is called the karma niyama process, where we know that we are the product of conditions. They're complex. Sometimes we don't even trace why what happens, and sometimes the effect is immediately apparent. But for sure, if we do an action that's fueled by generosity, kindness, bit of altruism perhaps, that will have a positive effect, and we will be creating very positive conditions. If, on the other hand, we act in a way that's full of greed, hatred and delusion, that will be providing other people, including ourselves, with conditions that are not really helpful for their development and growth. So this is really, really important, because what we're doing here is we're setting an understanding of what an ethical attitude would be like. What would it be like to have an ethical attitude in life? So stepping out from beyond the immediate benefit to myself and opening out to see what can be helpful for the greater good. And actually, when you think about it, this urban retreat is exactly that. It's the most fantastic set of conditions. There's all sorts of people who've been working away like beavers to get this up and running, I can tell you. Half of the work you will never ever see. People who've been doing stuff on media, people who've been up all night doing so many things they've done. And it is great, because here we are, right in the middle of Bethnal Green, taking on the fact that we can notice, be aware that we can take more responsibility for our actions in the world. And that way, already, that way of being more other regarding, more open, more conscious of the conditions your actions create, is actually a path of joy. When somebody says, "Oh, thank you so much, Shradagita, for getting up at 6:15 and getting here to lead a meditation of 7 o'clock. You know what Shradagita feels like? I can tell you because I know her. She's just delighted. She's really happy. She'll get up at 6:10 if necessary." Anyway, there's a wonderful image that speaks louder than millions of words, describing our interconnectedness and these processes of conditionality. And it's in the great Mahayana Buddhist Sutra, for those of you who like study. It's called the Avatamsaka Sutra, and it describes a cosmos of infinite realms upon realms filled with immeasurable numbers of Buddhas. And each is like an exquisite jewel set at a node in this net. It's an inconceivably huge net. But the thing about each of these jewels set at each little kind of intersection of the net is that they all reflect every other jewel. So your imagination is, I can't think of it, I can't see it. Well, try and just see, well, that's like us. Your good action is reflected in the way that the person next door receives it. And your receiving it positively is already reflecting in them. So in a sense, we are just hiking each other up, actually, instead of just saying, "Oh no." We can actually see positivity, things growing, and we are doing that ourselves. Well, there are big dilemmas that we encounter in this, of course, because what happens is, I'm trying to be generous and loving, and then so are you. But the way you choose to do it, I don't like. And I get grumpy with you then, and maybe you get grumpy with me. And so we have a bit of an argy-bargy. And then, maybe if we haven't got a framework which we can apply, we might think, no, I don't want to see that person anymore. Or we feel that we're being got at, or that people are being unfair to us, or that we're not acceptable, or all those funny things that happen. So, of course, there is a dilemma here. If we want to be other regarding and altruistic, we also need understanding, and we need to take on board that this is a training we're involved in. It's not something that we can just immediately step into, because the biggest craving of all cravings is the craving that we all individually feel, to have our individuality, our individuality kind of approved of by everybody else. So we want to be accepted, we want to be included. And that's natural, isn't it? But actually what we need to do is to see, well, how do we get there? How do we work? In the face of everything around us changing, being impermanent, the conditions that arise are very unpredictable sometimes. What do we do and how do we work? So for the rest of my talk, I want to talk about what we can do and how we work. Tomorrow night, do come, because Pranimanas is going to be talking about the first thing we can do, and you've all been doing it today, and that is meditate. What we do when we meditate is actually we start to break down this me, I like it like this, and you like it a different way, and I don't like that, and because it's nonsense, isn't it? Stupid. Of course, we're intelligent people, and we're also sensitive, so we know that we will have preferences that are different. So what we're trying to do is to train ourselves to be more aware of where those edges come in. And meditation is a wonderful tool for helping us to do that, helping us for our minds to become more flexible, more subtle, more refined, actually. But also the Buddha taught us 5 ethical principles that train our actions and train our speaking and train our thinking, training our body, speech and mind. And many of you will have been in contexts where you've just said the 5 precepts. You will have recited them. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness, clear and radiant, I purify my mind. So these 5 precepts are a guide. We sometimes chant them in Pali, this ancient Buddhist language, and in that form they're actually in a negative format. So what we're saying when we say Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami, we're saying I undertake to train in being careful not to take life, not taking what's not been given to me, acting sexually in ways that are described as misconduct. I'm going to be careful not to do that. I'm going to train myself not to do that. And I'm going to undertake to abstain from untruthful speech. And I'm going to undertake to abstain from substances that cloud the mind. Because the mind is essential for our spiritual growing, isn't it? We've really got the message about that right back at the very first thing that we read in the Dhammapada, and I read it out to you, so you know that bit. Okay, so we are making a genuine attempt to follow the positive precepts, and we begin to see ourselves becoming a little bit more subtle and refined as a result. Let's look at each one of them now and see where we stand. So this is you now gauging yourself. How far have you got in your practice of the 5 precepts? How are you doing with it? So the first one, with deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. By the way, remember what that purifying means. I purify my body of greed, hatred and delusion. I'm clear of it. I see how damaging that is. So I want myself and my actions not to be fueled by greed, hatred and delusion. A big ask. So what we're doing here is we're undertaking to enhance life with deeds of loving kindness. In a way, this first precept contains all the other precepts actually. And our intention, if we follow this precept, is not to reduce or obstruct or limit the life force of any other being. Certainly not the life force of any other person. But come on now, We do it every minute of the day. You know, I just remember driving here. I'm thinking, no, but I need to cross over 2 lanes. No, I need to, excuse me, I'm indicating I need to change over 2 lanes. Well, that person didn't want me to get in front of them. They probably had a good reason, but, you know, just even how we drive, everything we do, that little bit of aggression on the road, what happened next? You know, was that person annoyed with me? Did they then stop paying attention? I don't know. It would be much better if I was more kind and observant. So, well, obviously we can take this precept literally, and it has implications for how we work. If we want to operate with deeds of loving kindness and we want to enhance life, we're not likely to join the army. We're not likely to work in an abattoir. We're not likely, ultimately, to want to eat meat, actually. So vegetarianism is kind of implied by this precept. But most importantly of all, probably, are we creating conditions where other people can become more creative and sensitive and alive, or are we not? And that means including ourselves. Now I know, because I've often been on retreats where we've looked at these precepts, and people find it ever so hard to apply the first precept to themselves. Deeds of loving kindness to yourself. And that's really strange, because as I said before, we're hardwired to be able to do these material protective things, but actually we're sometimes incredibly harsh and cruel to ourselves. How we speak to ourselves, how we think of ourselves. You know, I'm the first to have to own up to this. I suffer quite a lot from self-doubt, and when I'm feeling self-doubt, I'm pretty damning on myself, actually. And it's not ethical, because it's not fair. It makes me less able to do what I'm doing right now. You know, I can't stand up and talk confidently. You're not going to be able to do it. You're going to be useless. They won't like it. They won't listen. You know, that's hopeless. It undermines. So don't do it. And I'll try not to do it as well. So you can be sure that if you are acting in a way that encourages people to discover the richness of their own nature through their actions in the world, that you yourself are benefiting hugely too. That is a given. So don't worry about like being a bit generous or whatever. That's fine. You will be benefiting too. And that takes us on to the second of the precepts. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. Open-handed generosity. Now, of course, we need to understand that to mean giving material gifts. You know, putting some money in the bowl, or putting some money for the class, whatever. You know, doing what you can in terms of giving materially, that's really important. Helping out on a team. You know, that is a lovely thing to do to support this venture, this Buddhist centre, this tree raptor movement. But just, you know, the little bit that you know, or the lot you know about the life of the Buddha, he met loads and loads and loads of people during his life. And every time he met somebody, he'd kind of intuitively know how to get them to connect with themselves. That's wonderful quality of intimate listening. Kind of, you know, radar-like perception of what the person needs. And I think we can do a lot more of that if we're following the second precept. Thinking about how to be alongside people, and especially at this time. I was just remembering an old friend who's died now, unfortunately, in India, Pranyamata. She was suffering a lot, and all I could do was just to go and see her and sit with her and let her say, I don't know what to do, this is too hard, it's too much, I can't do. And I'd just sit there and listen and be alongside, as I think Pranyamana has talked about before. Being alongside someone, that is a very generous thing to do. So listen carefully, give attention, as well as material goods and all the other things that you're wanting to give. So then let's have a look at the third precept. With stillness, simplicity and contentment, I purify my body. And the negative precept refers specifically to sexual misconduct. We could have a very long talk about this third precept, because actually it's a hugely important area in our life. I know in my own early life, I spent a lot of time compensating for that self-doubt I talked about. So I choose partners who are very high status, excellent musicians, fantastic singers, very good sculptors who just won a competition. And actually, it didn't really bother me what they looked like, or some other things that I might mention. As long as they were really good at what they did. Now, why did I want them to be really good at what they did? Because I was appropriating their skills to, just wear it for myself. That is so grossly unskillful. It's unskillful because it's not appreciating the person for who the person is. And this really, the third precept is about that. Seeing yourself as being a bona fide 100% human being, and liking it, and knowing it, and enjoying it, and not trying to find what's missing in you in some poor unfortunate person who you decided to hitch up with and pretend you love, or even do love. It's not really a good way to go about it. So you need to be very, very clear. Why are you with that person? And are you really appreciating them fully for what they bring to life? And that is the way to have a happy and fulfilled relationship in any case. Maybe I should do a talk about the third precept someday. So the fourth precept, oh my goodness. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. Why do we not say it the way it is? Well, it's 9:25 and you're not going to want to be sitting here much longer, so let me be brief. Mostly we don't say it like it is because we're frightened that the person won't like us if we tell them how it is. We're frightened, we're afraid, we have fear. We're afraid of being rejected, we're afraid of being excluded. What else are we afraid of? Lots of things. Not being appreciated. Or it might be coming from the other side, that if I really say what's going on for me, they will think I'm useless and a wally. They won't like me. They won't rate me. Or if I really say the way it is, they'll think I'm being big-headed and arrogant. So this is like a seesaw, this business here. We're either full of self-doubt and self-deprecation, or we're kind of all puffed up and full of arrogance, and then we teeter from one to the other. But what we're trying to do is to get somewhere in the middle of that seesaw where there's very little movement. And what we find there is the still point of the turning world. We're there. Stillness, simplicity, contentment. And we know ourselves, and we're happy to be with who we are. We bring that confidence and assuredness to how we listen to other people. And we don't try to kind of tell them some version of affairs that is very distracting, actually. You don't feel completely confident with someone who doesn't tell you things the way they are. You think, oh, they're only just saying that. And quite often that is the case, actually. We just say it because it'd be more comfortable for us than saying things the way they actually are. So, and I think that whole area is getting more and more challenging as we include more and more social media and virtual worlds and AI and everything else. Sometimes I'm on the phone, I'm a bit naive about these things. I don't even realise it isn't a person on the other end. It's a bot. I'm having a chat with this thing. Never mind my poor mum, she's completely and utterly confused by it all. Anyway, so the fifth and last precept, with mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. And this is the jewel in the crown of the 5 precepts, isn't it? It's mindfulness, as we've heard throughout our evening together, that really, really makes a difference. And of course, the implication is that you don't abuse alcohol or drugs because they immediately cloud the mind. But you also see the other things that you do, your own version of mind-numbing addictive behaviours. Like, 4 episodes of that thing that you're watching on. With that. Or watching pornography. That's another one. It's such a big problem at the moment. It's really problematic for us. And it's making things very complex, especially for young men, I think. We need to do something about it. So what is your current addiction? What is your mind-numbing addictive behaviour? Well, pay attention. Because actually what's happening when you do that is you're limiting your own potential for joy, for freedom, and for ease of mind. So that's what we're after here with this 5th precept. So my teacher, Bhante Sangharakshita, who set up this fantastic movement, said, every day of the week, every hour of the day, and every minute of the hour, we continually bear in mind the true nature of our situation. So what does that mean? The true nature of our situation is that we are the product of conditions, and that we ourselves are creating the conditions for others. So everything you do that is skillful, that's fueled by generosity, kindness, other regardingness, is creating positive conditions for the next layer. And every time you find yourself acting, which you will, from greed, hatred and delusion, and you feel regret, you feel the narrowing down of joy, fulfillment, beauty in your world. And really, this is a very strong message, because even a minor bad mood, like, when I wake up sometimes in the morning, I just think, oh no, I can't be doing it. Actually, that is probably greed. It's probably craving. And sometimes nowadays I can catch myself. I think, just stop right there. You don't need to pursue that. Just wait. Can you find some little tiny gem of contentment in your experience right now? Just some little tiny thing. Well, rest there until it clears up. So I would suggest that what we try to do when we think of ethics in our lives is we just look for that kindness. Find kindness for yourself. Secondly, reconnect with the principle of generosity to yourself and to others. And that could just be a kindly glance, because somebody I haven't looked at yet. Just a kindly glance would do it. Thirdly, find a tiny island of contentment in your experience. Just so you notice you're not overwhelmed by negativity. You can get a grip. Fourthly, I think this is so important. Speak honestly to yourself and listen to the answer. And then finally, let the clarity and radiance of your mind lead you to confidence and certainty that you're on the true path. What you're doing here is really worthwhile. So then, like enlightening beings, you can live alongside people in pain. You can be alongside. You can know what skillful action really is in the world. You can know intuitively what needs to be done. And then you can do it spontaneously with a full and generous heart. So, benefiting yourself and others alike. Thank you for listening.